Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan, your host. And this program gives you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We're here on Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m., and Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m. And I hope that you will join us for any or all 9. Each one of them is going to be a different conversation, including this one, a different conversation that you'll be able to listen to live via streaming at richarddugan.com. Podcasts are available at SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, iHeartRadio, and many other locations, too numerous to mention here. I don't have the air and the lungs to go through them all right now. We're also on YouTube where you can watch these conversations. And we certainly hope you'll subscribe and also click notification so that when a new conversation is posted, you will be notified. And that way you'll be able to learn more and have more choices and knowledge of said choices. We also ask that if you can support the work we're doing financially, we would be gratefully appreciative. We have a PayPal account, and it is there for your security as well as ours. And we basically encourage you to put in my email address, richard@richarddugan.com, when they ask for it, to whom you're sending that wonderful support. We also ask that you take time during the Decade of Perfect Vision, to basically listen to that still small voice in that quiet, peaceful, calm place. We hope that you will do that. With all of that being said, we now introduce our very special guest and good friend of mine as well. His name is Chuck Champlin. He has written a number of books, one of them called Wand, but today's focus is going to be on, this is an interesting title, folks, and I'm fascinated by this, Think Like a Molecule, seeking inspiration in the structures of thought. Chuck, it's great to have you here on the program and to be with you again. It's been a long time since we've had a chat, let alone an interview.
Mr. Richard, it is an honor to be with you, and very, very good to see your handsome face and your wonderful cowboy hat you're wearing. It looks like a great heirloom. But I remember fondly our hikes together and spending time together in Santa Barbara, and I'm now in Northern California. But delighted to be on this spaceless, timeless medium of the internet and Zooming with you today.
Well, I'll tell you what, it has been a long time, and you're actually up in an area that I'm familiar with only because I've been there, but it's been a while since I've been there, and it's a beautiful part of California, and we really miss being up there. And I know that you have traveled to a couple of the places that we actually stayed in, a place called Nevada City, which is south of Yuba City. By the way, the Yuba River, when we were there, it was flowing nicely. As a matter of fact, now come to think of it, I believe it was maybe 2016 or 17, because I remember that the following week after we had gone home, that was a raging torrent. I mean,
that does happen.
Yeah, it was almost, I think it nearly washed out that bridge on the highway going up towards Ananda Village and, of course, Yuba City. So love that part of the country, love that area. Still haven't gotten yet to the Redwoods, and I know that my wife wants to get me up there to see the Redwoods, and I think that we're getting closer to having that opportunity. But while we're up there, we'll certainly spend some time with you. Wanted to talk today, of course, about one of your books called To Think Like a Molecule. And basically, folks, just to give you a quick synopsis, it's to be aware of the physical foundation in matter that has given rise to our thoughts. And from there, it's onward into the realm of pure imagination and the twinkling stars of our infinite potential. First of all, where did the title come from? Because if I'm looking at that, if I'm looking at that description, it's like, what does that have to do with molecules?
Well, I'm just fascinated by the world of science. And my mother was a PhD, had a doctorate in the history of science, and so got me thinking about science. And so I actually reference her in the beginning of the book, talking about a time when she was stirred a whole bunch of sugar into a saucepan of water, and it looked like the sugar disappeared. And then she boiled all the water away, and there was the sugars left on the bottom of the pan. So I was about 6 or 7 years old, and so she was influencing me early in my life. So I mentioned that at the beginning of the book because that was sort of an inspiration. But the shape of molecules that we know now from what the scientists do creates such an enormous array of uh, little balls connected together, like the way two uh, hydrogen molecules circle away around an oxygen molecule. That just the structure of all of that inspired, say, Buckminster Fuller, a famous architect, to create his geodesic domes. So to me, the various structural ideas that come from the imaginary, nobody's ever really seen a molecule. So the imaginary world of molecules can really populate and inspire our own imaginary worlds of thinking, which is one of the most powerful forces on earth when you think about it.
Well, what is fascinating to me is the representation, as science has shown us. When I was in school, we had the little I don't even know what you call them, but they were models, mobiles maybe along those lines. But these were ones that sat on the table, and in many instances, and I think there are even models where you can that you can get where you have different colored balls and little sticks to connect each one of these balls and what would be, let's just say, two hydrogen atoms and an oxygen, and you connect those two together, or those three, I should say, with these little sticks, and that's the representation of what we call water.
Exactly
And
right.
and then there are other more complex elements that could take hundreds of those little balls in different colors and connect them with sticks. But the representation that I found interesting was on the subatomic level in a molecule. Certainly, you have the electron, the neutron, and the proton, right? You've got
Right,
those
you are.
things. Yeah, you got those things. I remember a little from science class. But what is fascinating to me is when you take a look at the microscopic world, even down to the subatomic, and then, my friend, you take a look at the macroscopic world, the universe,
Right,
and all of those balls spinning and whirling, and then they're spinning. What is it? We're in a solar system that has ostensibly 9 planets spinning around a star. But then there are other solar systems that are within the galaxy we call the Milky Way that we're a part of. And that galaxy is spinning. And then, of course, what was it? They've taken photographs with the Hubble and other interstellar telescopes of the
right,
universe. And I think they've even said that there are trillions of galaxies.
right.
You know, and so, as above, so below, that phrase keeps coming back to me.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
And there's one element that I want to touch upon real quickly here before we really dive into the work of to think like a molecule. And that is the concept of duality or judgment. And because to me, duality is a form of judgment. We pass judgment on this level where we are. I refer to this as the mid-crow. There's the macro, the micro, and the mid-crow. We live in the mid-crow area. Doesn't sound real cool, but there's judgment beyond belief. But when you look at the macro and the micro worlds, there's no judgment. They're just those elements, if you want to call them, if the subatomic particles, and then the macro worlds particles. They're just doing their thing. They're moving around and they're bouncing into each other and exploding and all of those things. But there's no judgment. We, as human beings, place judgment on those elements if we choose to. But then when you take a look at the mid-crow world, or the world we live in, this reality, we come to this place where, we have, for some reason, we have to pass judgment on the events that happen in our lives, the circumstances, maybe even in some instances, make it more personal, the size and the shape of our bodies, the various aspects of our physical existence. Maybe even we judge our thoughts. Oh, I shouldn't be thinking that, and so on and so forth. We judge our feelings. I shouldn't be feeling that, and the list goes on and on. And I've come to the realization myself, Chuck, and that is there is no duality in this world, in this middle space in which we live, only the duality that we choose to accept. The sun rises and the sun sets. It's a cycle. It just happens. We hope it continues for some time to come, but it that's just what happens. And so when I have events in my life that happen, I had my father passed away this past year,
Oh, my condolences.
2023. I lost my sister in 2022. I lost my dear friend of 53 years in 2023. That's part of, forgive me for using the phrase, it's overused. That's part of the cycle of life
Right,
as
that's right.
we know it here on this planet. It's neither good nor bad. It's that, you remember the Chinese proverb, I guess it is, or story about the farmer and his son and neighbor? And the neighbor comes over and asks the farmer, "So, how things going?" And he will tell him a brief story about what's going on. "Oh, that's good." And the farmer says, "Well, who's to say whether it's good or bad?" And he comes back the next day in the same scenario. "Oh, that's bad." And the farmer responds once again, "Who's to say whether that's good or bad?" And each succeeding story and each succeeding day is built upon the events from the previous day. For example, his son is out, so to speak, breaking horses, trying to train them so that they can ride them. And he falls off and breaks his leg. Neighbor says, "Oh, that's bad." Next day, they're coming from the government to conscript people to go to war. Well, of course, the son can't go because he has a broken leg. "Oh, that's good." And then the horses escape and run off. "Oh, that's bad." And the list goes on of these events. Well, again, it goes back to who's to say whether it's good or bad. So I'd like your perspective. Again, I know we're speaking on a molecular level here, To Think Like a Molecule, the title of the book by Chuck Champlin. But what's your perspective in that word? What have you discovered in your 70 plus years of existence?
Well, I'm interested in your choice of the word duality, and there are a lot of pairings of, and I think the most notable pairing in my world is the idea of a woman and a man are at the center of procreation and population growth and survival of our species, and that's not just our species. Animals, almost all animals have male and female, which leads to the generation of more of the species. And so, as I'm happily married to my wife Leslie now for 15 years, and uh, the fact of that partnership is so interesting that life on our planet has brought to us that sense of duality, of partnership, of cogenesis of the and the continuation of the spirit of the species. I find that to be very meaningful. That just was that accidental? That came out of evolution, out of the Big Bang. Somehow that, some people would say that God created that intentionally, perhaps. That's what the Bible suggests, but somehow or other, nature has just created that as a process for people to continue, for humanity to continue. And what's very interesting to me in this time period is that we now found such a forgiveness, if you will, such an openness to the idea of same-sex marriage and so on. Some people will claim, "Oh my goodness, that is against the order of the universe," and I can understand that argument. I don't buy into it because love is still the great winner on our planet. But
Hmm.
but I think that the idea of that particular duality of the harmony of the species joining together to create new and a continuation of the species, and that is just so deeply embedded into our molecular levels. The sperm and the ovum, those are the cellular level, but that still comes from that physical world that has created the physical world that is our bodies now. So I find that to be very profound.
I couldn't agree with you more. And also, each one of us is a miracle when, as science has helped us to better understand the pairing, if you will, of the sperm and the ovum. And that is this that under, we'll call them normal circumstances, there are usually millions of sperm that are vying for entry into that egg,
Correct.
and only one gets there.
Only one needs to get there, but
True.
which it's a random selection that creates the new human.
Exactly. And the point that my point being that out of the millions of sperm that had a chance, okay, that took the opportunity, only one enters.
Right.
And that has made me, that has made you as a unique individual. It's made every human being that's ever existed a unique individual. It seems as though, Chuck, that, and correct me if I'm wrong, from your observation, I should say, it seems as though we're only, I know there have been philosophers over the centuries who have spoken of this in some form, but it seems like we're only now starting to realize that, yes, we are unique. We are miracles of creation, if you will, however you want to define that. Um, and yet at the same time, we all got here in the same fashion through a sperm entering the egg and so forth, and the dividing and the dividing and the dividing and so forth. And that's what also makes us similar. I mean, yes, we're unique, but we're also the same at the same time, which is a
That's
rather
right. That's
interesting
right.
dichotomy.
We're all part of the same process, if you will.
Hmm.
Of course, then science starts challenging our assumptions. Well, perhaps we can clone an individual so we could have another one of me that would be exactly my same chemical, my same DNA structure, and another
Yeah.
one of you, another one of any one of us. But a lot of people and a lot of scientists are very concerned about doing that. Are we going to create marching armies of exact clones that can be programmed or whatever? It's a terrifying science fiction story. So,
Yeah.
but so I mean, as we continue to figure out the science and the action at molecular levels and so on, we just get smarter and smarter and smarter. And at some point, some people would say, well, we're going to simply outsmart ourselves right out of the universe. I mean, the development of the atomic bomb and the movie Oppenheimer was so profoundly uh, instructive and profoundly alarming about the possibilities of what our scientists are able to achieve. It's a miracle. It's glorious. It's terrifying, and that's the conundrum. That's part of the duality of our civilization, as you
Yeah.
use that word, that we have good, bad, life, death. The possibilities are complex. But I'm an optimist. I've been a member of optimist clubs for a very long time, and I just hope and have that optimistic hope and belief that our brains, which are really one of the most powerful forces that we know of in the universe, because we can create atomic bombs and we can move oceans and so on and so on, that my optimistic mind is that we are going to be smart enough to be able to use our good intentions, our hopeful, loving intentions to thwart the negative, destructive forces that seem to be rising up to challenge our existence all the time. I'm
Yeah.
thinking Israel and Gaza and all of those kind of miserable conflicts around the world.
Absolutely. One of the things that I like to do on this program is define terms, and you have a definition in here. A molecule might be defined as the smallest particle of a substance that retains all the properties of the substance and is composed of one or more atoms. It comes from the French. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, molecule, do a French accent, right? Or from the New Latin, which is the uh, diminutive of mass in Latin. And the first known use, of course, was in 1794. That's according to an online dictionary, and there are lots of synonyms. Um, in the beginning, for example, was the Word, and this is from the Old Testament, Genesis, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and so on and so forth. And of course, it was then spoken, which means that it had to have been a thought first. So when we start thinking about to think like a molecule, where do we start with that? Is that concept of in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, and then it was spoken? Um, is that a place where we can start, or is there a more current place where we want to start with this concept?
Well, I think, it's interesting that you bring up the concept of God, and because in a way, if you assume that God said, let there be light, and then suddenly there was light, and presumably all of the materials that could make up atoms or molecules or whatever. And I spent a fair amount of time thinking about that, because if you stand on a clear night and look out into the stars and see the moon cycling around us and see a comet go by or whatever, there is a vast universe out there. Where did it come from? Is it possible that some gigantic intelligence said, let there be light, let there be matter, let there be potential in our universe? I always assume that God is sort of curious. He says, I'm going to throw this stuff out there. And then he sits back on his giant armchair and says, now let's see what happens.
Hmm.
So that I think that's what I like about that idea, is that's probably free will. Free will
Hmm.
then comes from God sitting back and saying, okay, I've given you potential. Let's see what you're going to do with it. And so human beings, create fabulous automobiles and beautiful houses to live in, and create new babies, and create beautiful places to live, and also create all sorts of potential destruction. So that you kind of assume, it just looks like there is free will, there is danger in that, and that humanity has still got the potential to destroy itself. Is that something that God is looking back and saying, yeah, well, that, I guess I said that could happen, so I guess I'm going to have to live with it? But meantime, is there pure thought like that in the universe? Is God the potential of thought, or is thought only something that can happen because of matter, like our brains? Is there, people, you're a very spiritual person, Richard. I know that. And I would bet you would say that there is pure thought in the universe. But I'm still, I mean, all the people in the Bible that said, well, then God told me to go across here and to go fight and smite these people or whatever. I don't know in the Bible that I believe that a real God spoke to those people. I tend to think that humanity only 5,000, 6,000 years ago were having thoughts in their head. And a lot of those people said, well, that must be God telling me to do that. Well, I have
Mm,
seen a lot of people saying that God talked to them, but I have never seen God do anything direct that I know of, except for creating the universe, apparently. So
yeah.
I don't know what to make out of it all, but those are my outlines of my thoughts, is that thought seems to be only in our heads, and the potential of what we may do, that is all around us.
Well, the other aspect of it too for me is I find it a little incomprehensible to think that God is schizophrenic from the Old Testament to the New Testament. I mean,
Right.
either his character is what it is, if we want to refer to it in that respect, or it isn't. And then there are other aspects as well that I think about. I have pondered these as well, in terms of the whole aspect of judgment standing before the Almighty, and and sort of like a PhD student defending their dissertation. I'm
Right.
standing there defending my life, kind of like that movie with Albert Brooks and Meryl Streep. Great movie, by the way.
What's it
Where
called?
Yeah, I believe it's called Defending Your Life.
Oh, okay. I have to look that up.
Yeah, it's just a fun movie because he is out of his mind scared that he's being judged during the review process, and she is having the time of her life. She can eat whatever she wants and not gain a pound, which of course is probably most women's dreams. Um, and he's just not getting it. They keep telling him, "Look, this isn't judgment. We're just reviewing. We just want to review what your life was all about." But the thing that I have often said this, and again, I say this again, this is me, my perspective, my observations, and that is this: if in fact there is a judgment, let's just say, and I have to stand before the Almighty to justify my existence and all of this stuff. Well, God is, based upon, if you want to use the ancient wisdom teachings we refer to as the Bible, God is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent. Knew all of this stuff was going to happen before it was ever created. That is the general consensus, if you will, of those attributes. So I would be standing before God, and I'd say, first of all, point one of two, you created me. You knew that all of this was going to happen. So, there's nothing I can say. You're going to do with me what you will. So I got nothing to add. However, point two is because you knew all of this was going to happen, you set all of this in motion. This is all on you. This is not on me. This is all on you because you're the one who wrote this novel. Okay? You're the one who wrote this story, not me. I'm just a character that you placed here. Now, I will stand and say, I take full responsibility for my life. And I think that's one of the things that we're missing in this world today is that people, regardless of status and position and what have you, many of them refuse to take 100% personal responsibility for who they are, where they are, how they are, and why they are in those first three elements. How does that play into? Because I bring this up as the example in modern times in the 21st century. In the 80s, I went through personal growth programs in the 80s because that's where we were in victimhood. It's my parents' fault that I'm the way that I am. Then we went into codependency. All right. Then we finally emerged from that into interdependency. We began to take responsibility. We began to understand, oh, it's my choices, regardless of, what my parents may have taught me. I still made the ultimate choice. I'm the final arbiter of the choices. But then in 2015, specifically in a presidential campaign, somehow, some way, we went right back into victimhood. And I basically said, I'm not going to play this game. I refuse to play that game again. It isn't productive. And I will tell you that there was only a period of time in the late 70s after I graduated from high school, Chuck, where I blamed the state of Arizona for labeling me legally blind. This is them. This is on them because I didn't choose this. They did, you know. And I finally got to the point where I'm thinking, you know what? That's not real productive. I need to start thinking differently. So are there steps? I know I was just looking through the table of contents and so forth, but are there steps that one can take that you have discovered, especially through the writing of this book, where we can begin the process, if we choose to think like a molecule? And if that's the case, I guess the question is, How does a molecule think? I mean, are you assuming that it has a brain and or consciousness and or free will and so forth? Because I've often thought that if we use the concept of democracy in the context of our cellular structure, and each cell says, "I'm going to do my own thing," the body would cease to exist, among other things.
Well, I want to point out that I say in the page one of the book that there's not been much debate as to whether molecules can think. Despite their energy and complex structures, molecules most likely do not take the time to ponder their place in the world. So that is an important point. Molecules don't think. It's the complex. It's the complex of molecules that formed our bodies and our brains and created consciousness long after the beginning of molecules that thinking has really started. But to get to your good question, what lessons for thinking or living might we take from this book? I think awareness about the physical structures. I mean, one of my favorite heroes is Buckminster Fuller, the man that created the geodesic dome, which is a structure, with the kind of the structure and shape of a soap bubble. And just that became, a one of the most efficient ways to enclose a space that's easier to heat and so on. It hasn't become a new example for the way we want to build our houses, though some people do live in geodesic domes. But the point is that there is so much in our world that comes from the molecular, and biochemists and bioengineers are creating new, improved uh, styles of coffee or alcohol or food or whatever. We're using that molecular world and our knowledge of the molecular world to build a better world all the time. But I think that the idea is that with our free will, with our ability to imagine, we are able to create messages and rules and understandings for ourselves that we can take to ourselves. We are not victims. We are not passive. We are active thinkers, and we can build out of our own imaginations, out of our own dire desires, our own intuitions, our visions that we can have for ourselves, what we want to have in our own life. And I think that's one of my main ideas is that we are not inert. We are not uh, thoughtless. We are rich in thought and imagination, and we have to use that power. Just like one of my heroes is Walt Disney, who built a fantastic world based on hope and imagination and love and the idea of family, that we can have a fun world. And he built Disneyland, and then he built Walt Disney World in Florida. And Disney has been on some ups and downs and currently a little bit on a downtrend, they tell us in the economic papers. But I just still love the power of imagination as exemplified by Walt Disney, what we can do with our world and with our own individual lives through the power of hope, desire, kindness, and pure imagination to build a world that is better for all of us. So that to me, that's what I am inspired by, is that the power of what our imaginations can do with both the knowledge of the structure of matter, but also the gift from matter for our imaginations to exist and to have physical reality in this world.
Well, I will tell you that it fascinates me to no end to, no pun intended, think about.
Isn't that a
uh,
great thing you can do?
it is, and it is. What's amazing is that um, uh, when one starts to think about the various opportunities, and of course we use the word choices here on the program, choices and knowledge of those choices, and that is defined as an opportunity that you never knew about before. And then we then go through the process of telling you what that opportunity is all about. So now you have the choice and knowledge of that choice. And it seems to me that in the thinking process, that's also part of the process to seek out new choices that may very well be outside of our respective box or nine dots, as the analogy goes.
Right.
How do you go about the process of finding those new choices, those new ways of thinking that facilitate your life's. The word happiness has been used an awful lot lately, and I'm actually reading a book by both a Dr. Arthur Brooks and Oprah Winfrey.
Ah,
It's called, I think it's called Building uh, Your Life or Building a Better Life. I'll have to look that up and I'll give you the title here in a minute. But where they're talking about happiness, and of course, in our founding documents, we talk about that all the time in terms of life, liberty. These are inalienable rights,
right,
supposedly given to us by the divine, the greater power, whatever, of life. That's self-evident. We're alive. Liberty. That's not so self-evident, but they don't give us happiness. They give us the pursuit of happiness. So in terms of the choices that we're talking about, in terms of the opportunities, in terms of thinking in this realm, uh, how do you go about finding those new ways of thinking, especially in this context of thinking like a molecule?
well, I think just the power of your imagination and the power of your ability to think is that, I mean, we know that we have about 8 billion thinkers of us on the planet. We have a lot of different ways of thinking. You've got people that support a certain former president who think that that person is a paradigm of excellence. And then there's I hopefully a larger amount of people that think that that former president is not a paradigm of excellence. But they're both spending a lot of time thinking. All of these 8 billion people are spending a deal of time thinking, trying to plan their own pathways and so on. And As I said a minute ago, I just hope that the calculation of those 8 billion people will ultimately arrive in a greater possibility for peace and happiness on the planet. What distresses me is that a large amount of people tend to think that you have to use force in defining the course that you want the planet to take. So we see the almost complete destruction of Gaza that's been happening over the last several since October 7th is that seems to be a constructive pathway, according to some thinking, is that is going to be the way we need to go. So some people think that applying force, that's still a big portion of their humanity's consciousness is that we think we've got to apply force, that we got to have good armaments, we got to have strong armies and so on, because we need to be ready to use force at any time. That dismays me completely, but at the same time, it's almost an inevitable political reality is that you need to have enough force to overcome the other force that's going to be applied to you. So that's kind of thinking like a molecule in a way. You need to have equal force meeting an equal force in order to not have one force winning out. So, you can analyze this in so many different ways, but my hope, prayer, belief, and intention is that we would learn to use forces for the good, to make better automobiles, to make better homes, because you can't build a home without forcing a nail into the wood or whatever. It takes a certain amount of application of force to do things, or to build a highway through a tunnel through a mountain takes a lot of application of force. But when it becomes inhuman, when applied against living human life, to me, that is a sin. That is a crime against life and against humanity to be trying to take human life as an appropriate use of force. To me, that's a completely inappropriate use of force, and we should figure out a way to be able to, as a humanity, we should be able to figure out a way to make that not an appropriate use of force. So, but my hope is that we are thoughtful enough in our in our thinking and caring and loving enough in our thinking to be able to apply our intelligence about how do we make the most out of this miracle of creation. And whoever created this universe, I can't imagine a living entity big enough to create the universe, which is 14 billion light years across. Now, it's a pretty darn big place. But I do find it awesome and exciting to think about this, what kind of entity, what kind of life force, I would think, could create a universe. And it's just that seems at the scope of God, but I just don't know how to apply a personality or a consciousness or a physical reality even to the concept of a God. It's just beyond my comprehension.
I think anthropomorphizing the concept has not benefited us. You know, there's this white bearded gentleman sitting on his throne or his recliner, his lazy boy, running the show. You know, by the same token, I'm not going to sit here and say that that isn't possible because I don't know. And I'm certainly willing to say when it is true, I don't know. I'll get asked questions all the time, especially by my wife. She'll ask me this question and I'll say, I don't know.
But it
I
is
don't.
interesting. It is interesting, Richard, I think, to imagine a kind of intelligence, a kind of consciousness, a kind of intentionality that could potentially exist in the universe and could potentially say, let there be light, let there be matter, let there be a
Yeah.
universe here. And so because when you think about the capabilities of the early IBM computers or the capabilities now with Google, which is almost like a worldwide computer, we haven't come up with any kind of output from Google that's coherent at all. It's not. There's no intentional goodness that comes out of Google, except for the amazing fact of its existence that all these brains can somehow be coalescing and sharing thoughts and so on. It almost looks like the beginning of some kind of a worldwide intelligence, except there's no purpose out of it except for continuing its own existence. But given the scope of those kind of realities that our human minds are making on the planet, you can almost begin to take additional leaps up to what could potentially create a planet like Saturn or Jupiter? What could potentially create a sun that would burst into flame to warm all these planets and warm us as we lay on a beach? What could potentially Is there a potential intelligence large enough to have created not just our solar system, but the trillions and trillions of them that are out there? What kind of intelligence could be that big? The word God doesn't even begin to describe the scope of that. And I don't
Yeah.
know, but it does lead my imagination into realms of pure science fiction, dreaming about what could potentially encompass this 14 billion light years across universe of ours.
Well, I find that interesting that you have a number to define the distance across the universe that we know, because the only definition I've or the only measurement I have ever heard throughout my growing up was that the universe was infinite. You know, you couldn't, you know, you can't even wrap your brain around what does that mean if it's infinite? It just goes on forever? Really? Wow.
Yeah, and
Okay.
what's interesting, I'm a big reader of science news, and Dennis Overby from the New York Times is a particularly powerful hero of mine because he just follows these stories. But there was a story in the New York Times this week about some of the oldest galaxies that exist, and they're when they talk about seeing light from some of these things that were projected near the beginning of the universe, maybe being projected about 500 million years after the beginning of the universe, which scientists pretty much agree, is happened 14 billion years ago. Well,
Hmm.
the universe was born 14.7.5 or something billion years ago, presumably light has been traveling across that. And the speed of light, of course, as a light year is how far light will travel in a year. But if light has been traveling since the beginning of the universe, there is some light that is reaching us having traveled 14 billion light years. And so we're looking at some shapes of those very early galaxies, and they're saying, oh, it's interesting. They look a little bit like pickles. They look a little bit like bananas. They're sort of oblong shaped. And so it's just very interesting because these scientists can't figure it out either. But, what does it mean to be looking back into the past 14 billion light year, 14 billion years ago and
Hmm.
seeing what those, so they're saying, but then that's 500 million years before that. That must have been the Big Bang, and they even have this term for the beginning of the universe, the Big Bang. It looks like a point, like about the smaller than a pencil tip, was the beginning of the universe. To me, that's everybody scratches their head, so that doesn't make any sense. So is there a new elements of multi-dimensions or dimensionality in which
Hmm.
you could turn the corner and suddenly there's a universe.
Yeah. Well,
So those are the things that the scientists are struggling with, and I just sort of try to be at the leading edge of what true scientists are thinking about. And
yeah.
so thinking of that's all in the scope of thinking like a molecule, sort of being aware of a fundamental reality in which is that inside of every one of us is molecules that are basically in atoms that are coming together just like this universe somehow came together to make us and to make our ability to think.
Yeah. I'm a firm believer that everything that exists at whatever level we want to look at it, there is a pattern. Okay, there's a protocol, there's a process, and we were talking earlier, of course, about the sperm and the egg and so forth. And okay, so I don't know how many cells or molecules make up an egg or a sperm. Okay, but let's just say, for the sake of argument, that the egg is its own individual uh, entity, as is the sperm, in spite of the fact that there are millions of them that swim upstream like salmon,
Right.
to their spawning grounds, as it were. And when they get together, when these two elements come together, they actually become one.
Right.
All right. So there's a single element. I'm just using that term loosely. But then that element, through the combining of the two, then divides in half
Right.
and then divides in half again. And that process just continues and continues and continues. And so I'm sitting here thinking, okay, as above, so below, because we've heard that phrase throughout the centuries from various philosophical bents. And I think, okay, maybe that's how the Big Bang started. Maybe through the process of bringing two elements together. But then, of course, there's always the one wild individual who says, "Yeah, but well, where did those two elements come from?" It's like, okay, there has to come a point, where we have to sort of, and maybe I'm wrong in this, but again, this is the whole process, the beautiful process of pondering things, thinking about things,
Right.
is wondering where stuff came from, how this happened, how that happened. I mean, I look at some of these Facebook and YouTube shorts of things that happen, especially on the highways. I see some of these accidents, and I'm going, how in the world did this person make that decision that caused their car to stumble over and over and over again into a ditch?
Right.
Why would they, and so forth. So there comes a point at which, all right, you've got these two elements. And by the way, when I think about life, for example, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All right, life. But when those two elements come together to create the one that then divides and divides and divides, those two elements are alive. So when people start talking about a new life, That's inaccurate. It's not a new life. It's the this is my observation. It's a continuation of life, similar to what you referred to earlier on the program.
Well, I think that's a very beautiful point. But what is interesting to me is that when the cell and the ovum, when the sperm and the ovum come together, I mean, meaning starting a new life means a new person, because the
Hmm.
ovum was not a person, the sperm was not a person. It's only the
Sure.
generation of those two
Yeah.
that created that creates the new person. So a new life is a new way, as a way of saying a new person.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, the continuity of life is that there, you couldn't have life without life, if you
Mhm.
will. And that's one of the great mysteries in among the scientists that I love to read, and Mr. Overby being a good example, trying to understand, how did life arise out of the slime, out of the mud of the oceans or the mud of the salt marshes or whatever it was. There was some place or other that some basic proteins came together or something like that, and how out of the ooze. There was a wonderful animated film made, I don't know, 30 or 40 years ago, in which to the march of the song Bolero, a little bubble in the mud suddenly goes bloop, and there's suddenly a little worm that's crawling along, and to the Bolero, dun 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 dun. This creature goes and a worm crawls up and became a lizard, and then the lizard crawled up and became a monkey, and it crawled up, and then you have finally a person, and it finally comes to a great climb, and who knows what? We're at the level of our humanity with 8 billion people creating Google and other miracles, but that showing that out of the ooze came this for the life of our planet anyway, 4 billion years of to create that Google.
Yeah,
It's
I
just
hear you. Yeah.
phenomenal that out of that little teensy blip in the mud someplace. So that's just, to me, just as big a mystery, and scientists don't have the answer to that. How did life start? And how did the universe start? And then, of course, the big questions about what other life. Why have we not seen any signals with all of the listening we've done to the outer space? Why have we not heard anybody else talking about the Pythagorean theorem across the universe?
Yeah. Yeah, and of course, I know that there are those who believe primarily in the scientific community that, for example, math is the universal language, and I'm sitting here thinking, well, I don't know. I'm thinking maybe more music, vibration, if you will, is sort of the universal language. By the way, isn't that an interesting aspect? And God said, let there be light, and there was light. But in that whole dissertation, there is no reference to sound. And God
Uh-huh.
said, God spoke, he said, which means there was sound, but he never says, let there be sound.
Uh-huh.
It's like, okay, what we'll do is we don't have to worry about creating sound. What I have to do is I have to make sure that all of the beings that I create have the capacity to uh, interpret the vibrations. Let's just say the old joke about if a tree falls in the wood and there's no one there to hear it, does it make a sound? Well, yeah, you don't know, because if there's nobody there to hear it, how do you know that it made a sound? You can't say either way. It's kind of like what is that scientific axiom of Schrodinger's cat?
Right.
Okay, either the cat is alive or the cat is dead, but you don't know because there's a lid on it.
Right.
So you don't hear that aspect in that dissertation. Let there be sound. You know,
Right.
so I
As a,
find that
as
interesting.
as a radio guy, you'd be particularly interested in the sound.
Yeah. Oh
It's
yeah.
interesting. It's all radiation.
Yeah.
But that is interesting. And when you say "let there be light," I'm trying to decide whether that light, does that encompass enough matter to create a planet, or whatever.
Mm.
let there be light and matter, or does light encompass matter, or does light encompass sound for that matter? To, it's all the radiations, the waves that go through space.
Yeah.
And obviously the
And
sound doesn't get off the earth because there's no air off the earth,
right.
but the radiation, the light radiation can get off the earth.
Well, and even it's also stated again in this particular document, and God created the heavens and the earth. And I'm going, okay, I get you. He created this planet that we call Earth,
Right?
and that's it. He created the heavens and the earth. It's the
Well,
only planet that God created, or are we to assume that God created the heavens, that there are multiple heavens, kind of like what is it in the Divine Comedy? There are, what are there, seven levels of hell? You
right,
know,
exactly.
there are seven levels of heaven. I know the
Well,
Mormon. Go
everybody's
ahead.
been trying to figure out the structure of the universe, and Dante did that with his seven levels of hell. We've come a long way since then, and we've come to understand that there are nine planets in our solar system, and then there's trillions and trillions of suns and planets all throughout this heavens. Nobody knew what the heavens were other than looking up and seeing blue sky. But at that time, we've come a long way in the
Yeah.
5,000 years since the Bible started to get
Yeah.
written.
By the way, I found it interesting when I also co-host a program called Skyview with Dr. Sky Steve Cates, who basically we talk about astronomy, space, aviation, and weather.
Great.
And we often talk about the light that comes from the universe to
Right.
us and how old it is, and that it is entirely possible, maybe not probable, but possible, that wherever that light came from such a far distance away, wherever that light came from, that source may not even exist anymore. But we're just now seeing the light of that element that is now gone because maybe it blew up in a supernova or whatever the case might be.
That's true.
That to me is quite it's mind-boggling, if you will, to contemplate. And of course, as we get closer and closer, there, what was it? They said that if we were to travel to Mars, for example, and I know lots of people are wanting to do that, I think it takes 9 months to get there and 9 months to get back. But for example, communication, it takes, I can't remember the exact time frame, but it takes several minutes to transmit from Earth to Mars, for example, the Mars rover, to send it a command, and then it takes that same length of time for the, uh, shall we say, the response to return to Earth, saying yes, we carried out the command.
Right, right, right.
So we're constantly looking into the past, and I've often done this analogy, being in this industry, and then computers coming into this industry back in the 90s. Well, actually before that, but nonetheless, in terms of personal computers and sound editing, sound recording software, and how you watch the wave being created of the voice. And that there's that center line where on the one side, it's usually the right hand side, there's nothing. Just it's a void. There's nothing there. But on the left hand side, that's where the wave is, the representation of the sound that has been transmitted to the computer. But it's that center line that is the here and the now. It's this moment. And so, as I am speaking, or even as you are speaking and hearing your voice, believe it or not, what you are hearing is already in the past.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
It's already in the past. No matter how quickly you can hear it, it's already gone.
Right. Well, the sound takes a while to get there for sure.
It,
You hear the airplane going overhead. It's 10,000 feet up in the air. You look up there. No, the plane's not there. It's about 2 miles the other way because it took a while for that sound to get down. So it does. You just have to kind of, when you turn off a light switch, the light is still hitting the wall in your room while the light is off.
mhm.
course,
Yeah.
that light doesn't take very long to cross your room, but it does take 10 minutes to get to Mars. You're right.
Yeah, it's truly a amazing a concept. I mean, even if you have men on the moon, it's not instantaneous. It still takes a few seconds for the transmissions to reach their destination, the receivers.
And those are the
Just
kind
like
of marvelous things that
yeah.
when you dig into science, it's just like, golly, that is in it. You think of Gomer Pyle, golly.
By the way, beings that are out in the universe, they're watching. They're still watching some of the programming that we broadcast on radio and television back in the 20s and 30s,
Yeah,
and the current stuff hasn't even left our solar system, maybe, or left
that's
our
right.
galaxy as of yet, because it takes time for the sound waves to. They don't travel as fast as light. Again, that's one of the reasons I love the program Skyview with Dr. Sky is these kinds of conversations that we talk about. They just fascinate me, and I've often, I brought up some very sort of you might call them bizarre questions, but they're questions that come to mind because it's like, what if? Um, Let me
Right.
ask you, Chuck Champlin is my guest. He's the author of Think Like Think Like a Molecule. Cute little book. I love the cover. You have actually two covers, I guess, an original cover, but this one I have has a great little, almost looks like a star going supernova. It's seeking inspiration in the structures of thought. In the structures of thought. Talk to us about the structure of thought. Because the first thing that comes to my mind is of a building being built, and there's scaffolding all around it to help to start building it. So what is the structure of thought?
Well, I actually have two different titles for the book. The earlier title says Seeking Inspiration in Connection and Collaboration. And then this, when I republished the book, changed a few words here and there, but did change the subtitle. And I think the structures of thought are, we do imagine almost anything we do in the structures of our thought. And so, in a way, there are tremendous amounts of thoughts. Let me show you a book that I found recently.
As Chuck is searching that out, a reminder that this is Tell Me Your Story. Oh, very cool. I like that.
This book called Cognition. It's a textbook from school. This is the fifth edition of it, but it's amazing to see the way the brain lights up. They have a lot of images in this one. They're showing a light at the top of the brain. It's actually showing a light bulb. But there are a lot of ways that scientists can now look inside the brain and see the different areas. When you're thinking about walking your dog, this part lights up, but over here lights up. Well, when you're thinking about kissing your wife, no, this lights up and this lights up, or whatever, And so the brain is such a complex thing, but that's not exactly what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about are the way that you may formulate what you want to do today, what you want to do with your great idea. Do you want to write a book? Do you want to do a podcast? Do whatever. How do you think about your day tomorrow? What are you planning to do tomorrow? And so it's one of my favorite words is metacognition. Metacognition is thinking about thinking, basically. And so I think that's one of the things that I've discovered and admired in my own thinking about this book is that I'm saying it's possible to be aware of your thoughts enough to say, wait a minute, there I am with my bad thinking about how much I dislike that person, or my bad thinking about, gosh, I've got to have another cigarette, or whatever it is, some bad behaviors. And do you have enough stepping outside of your thinking to realize, well, here comes that bad desire again, and I don't think I want that. So, metacognition, can you really think about your thinking in a way to improve it and thinking about what you want to do with your life at a more profound level, thinking about how you want to relate to people at a more sensible level, things like that. So
Mhm.
metacognition is, I think, a very powerful tool that I think I would impress upon everybody, are you able to think about your thinking in a way to um, help it be more healthy for you, more productive in your life, better for the friends around you, better for your financial well-being, whatever else? Are you able to think about the structures of your intentions for yourself and for your life?
That's interesting because what we want to become is the observer of our thoughts in this
Right,
context of what you're talking about. We want to become the observer. It's similar to conversations I've had about meditation.
right.
It used to be that you want to get the mind of quiet down, be quiet. I'm trying to meditate over here, right? And then of course I've taken it to new levels where I say, well, why don't we say to the mind, hey, I want to go over here and I want to spend some time with my friend in meditation and so forth. And when I come back, I'll have some new ideas and concepts we can play with. And then I had a guest who said, well, why don't you try this? The mind is kind of, we've heard of the monkey mind, and the mind is like a child, right? So why not say, I tell you what, I want to go over here, all right, in this quiet place, and I want to meditate. You can come with me, but you have to be quiet. Okay. In other words, invite the mind to come with you, just like you would a child. I mean, imagine how you would feel as a child not being invited to a birthday party. It may not be quite as a traumatic as an adult, but still, you want to be, at least if you are going to refuse, it would be nice to be invited. So you invite the mind to come along, but there's only just one rule. You have to be quiet so that I can focus on the still small voice. It's so small that if you aren't quiet, I won't be able to hear it. And then we won't have anything to play with later. And I thought, wow, what a concept to basically make friends with the mind, make the mind your partner, because you cannot compartmentalize the human being any more than you can compartmentalize the species, because as you and I probably both agree, we're all connected. At some level, we are all connected. I mean, I think about it in terms of, let's just say, for example, empaths. And there are people, I'm married to one who is an empath, which sometimes can be very, very frustrating because she's going to tell me how I'm feeling or what I'm thinking. And I'm going to say no, because it's like, wait a minute, let me, you know, that's kind of where the ego comes in. Let me share this with you instead of you picking it out of the air, that kind of thing. But we're all interconnected in that respect. We're all made of the same, as I think it was Carl Sagan who said, stardust. We're all made of the same stardust. We
Right.
came from stardust. We're going to return to stardust.
That's true. And Carl Sagan is a hero of mine. I have his biography here, and I have his book on cosmos and stuff too. Yeah, he's a definitely a heroic figure. But I think the idea of the metacognition, you do have so much capability to direct your thinking. Not always, if you are driving down the street and suddenly a something bright white flashes outside the car, you might have to quick take a look at it, but you do have the ability to inject phrases into your head like, today I am going to be smarter, today I'm going to be smarter, and I was hearing my sister telling me about something she heard. Some people have higher levels of internal dialogue and voicing than other people do, and I decided that's probably one of the seven different kinds of intelligence. People talk about, some people have better intuition about music, some people have better intuition about spatial relationships, and some people probably have clearer awareness of their thinking, of their intuition, of the internal voice. So, but I'm a very aware that metacognition involves the possibility of putting intentional thoughts into your head about the way you want to change the life, the way you want to behave, the things that you want to focus on to prioritize your own sense of what's the value in your life.
That also makes me think about a portion of my book, which has not been published yet. I'm still trying to get to that phase. I may have to talk to you about that because you have your own media company, as it were, and then maybe you can give me some insights as to how to bring this particular book to fruition. Although I am not hard on myself about having taken 22 years. Oh, now it's 23 years to put this book together because I remind myself that the book will come out when it's time.
What's it called?
It's called Choices.
Ah,
It's called Choices. And in it, I talk about how making basically you have five different steps in this process. And one of them is to choose the type of input that you want that will reinforce step one is make a choice. Okay. If it's about your home life, if it's about relationships, your job, your economy, whatever the case might be, vacation, make a choice. I want to go to Yuba City to visit Chuck and Leslie Champlin. I'll get it. Anyway, I want to go to Yuba City to visit my friends. And so now you go through the other steps. And one of them has to do with choosing your personal input. And you choose the input that reinforces the choice you have made. And you stay away from or you discern what input you don't want. And again, when I speak of input, I'm talking about all of it through the five senses, okay? What you read, what you watch on TV, what you listen to, in terms of maybe if it's the news, the podcasts, music, et cetera, et cetera. Whatever the source is, you discern whether or not that is in support of your choice to visit Chuck and Leslie up in Yuba City, or it's not. Doing some research on how to get up there, how to travel. We're going to take the vehicle we're in and stay at hotels or what have you, or are we going to somehow figure a way to take the travel trailer and park it at an RV park once we get up there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
or you can stay in our guest bedroom for.
We will do that. That's what we will do because that would facilitate having the funds to be able to do other things and so forth and so on. So when you're talking about this metacognition, it makes me think about that in terms of what is it that I really want, you know, and then surrounding myself, and this also includes the people you have in your life.
Right.
Okay. And I used to use the word, you have the right to discriminate. I think the better word that I've already used is you have the right to discern who you want in your life and who you don't. When Amrita was going through her cancer scare back in 2001,
Wow.
her ex-husband would visit her in the hospital. And he would be constantly talking about sort of the negative aspects of having contracted cancer. At one point, I never told her, I don't want him in here anymore. You tell him not to come by. I said, I'm not real happy with the fact that he comes in here and says the things that he does because it's not helping you. But again, I left the choice up to her. I shared with her how I felt. But at the same time, it's not up to me. It's up to her. Matter of fact, the book Choices is based upon a question that I asked her, along with a flyer that I created that I taped up all over the house
Good.
while she was going through her chemo that had
Wow.
those 5 steps. But the question I asked her just before she went into surgery was, and I did ask it this way, do you want to live or do you want to die? I may not like your choice, but I will support you in it. And so that's where that comes from. But I think that we have forgotten that we have choices. We're not victims. See, this is where you don't have any choices. If you're a victim, you don't have any choices. It's not you're not responsible for your life, you know?
Yeah.
When the reality is, if you think like a molecule and you're observing your thoughts and you're realizing, oh, I'm thinking this and I'm thinking that. One of the first things I would say, though, Chuck, is whatever the thought is, and I don't want it, it's not that it's a bad thought. It's just I don't want it because it's not supporting my choice.
There you
It's,
are.
you know, because then what you're doing is you're criticizing the mind for coming up with it. I mean, it's your thought. Your mind came up with it, but don't put the mind down because that thought came in, because that thought may have been created by some traumatic event that you had as a kid growing up, you know?
Right,
Uh,
exactly right. Yeah. It's amazing. And so I think that metacognition is a useful tool to kind of be aware of what you're thinking and
mhm.
worth being able to either not direct your thoughts or moderate your thoughts to avoid things that are not part of your ideal sense of self.
Exactly, exactly. Chuck Champlin is my guest. Think like a molecule. It's the a precursor to walk like an Egyptian, but Chuck didn't write that one. Uh, um,
Beautiful title.
I think that well, it is indeed. Think like a molecule, but walk like an Egyptian. Um, Boy, that takes you back what to the? I can't remember if that was the 70s or 80s when that came out. Be that as it may, a fascinating investigation into being aware of the physical foundations in matter that have given rise to our thoughts, and from there it's onward and upward, if you will, into the realm of pure imagination and the twinkling stars of our infinite potential. Before we wrap up this program, and boy, I've got to tell you, this has just been fascinating for me. Talk to us about the well, how about we do this, compare and contrast the concepts of thinking like a molecule and imagining like a molecule.
Well, I think that's the range of what I'm suggesting is that be aware of your thoughts. Use that skill of metacognition, and be thinking about the structures of your thought and also the structure of your life. Uh, you know, and be aware of that the concept of the H2O, two hydrogens and one oxygen. What's interesting as I think about them, they are so fluid. That's just a
No
point of
pun
term.
intended. No
No
pun
pun
intended.
fully intended.
Oh, okay.
Because those two hydrogens roll around that oxygen. They're not fixed. You normally see it looking like, a solid a drawn picture, but these things
Mhm.
are so malleable, and so the two uh, um, uh, hydrogens and the one oxygen, they bond to other water molecules as well, because there's a slight polarity between the minus and the plus in that H2O formulation. So that's just one of the examples. And other structures of molecules are frankly way beyond me, but I liked your reference to the stick and ball models that you used to see in high school,
Yeah.
of the molecules of, say, a hydrocarbon or something. Some of those molecules, or the DNA molecule. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
come to understand how enormously complex those things are, based on a very, very simple formulas of AC or CA connections, and that in the helix, the spiral DNA helix. So that's, and there you are with the memory of life itself. And that's such a profound miracle of how DNA, something smaller than the head of a pin, is contains the entirety of what your hair color is likely to be, or how long you're likely to live, and so on, all tied up in that DNA molecule.
You know
So
what is also
just so
fascinating?
profound, so profound
Oh,
is
my Lord.
what the matter that we understand as human beings now, how much scientists and our thinkers have figured out how it all works.
And again, those diagrammical representations thereof. It's like How did you come up with it? Did you actually, with a microscope, an electron microscope, whatever you used, a high magnification, you were actually able to see the DNA molecule, not only the strand, but the fact that it was also twisted,
Twisted.
slightly twisted? I mean, somebody had to have either imagined it, I guess, or seen it under a microscope or whatever to come up with what we see now as fixed diagrams or images in books and so on and so forth, or even as models on a laboratory table, that kind of thing. That is something that blows me away.
Right,
Um,
and the process of figuring out the structure of that DNA molecule happened back in the 1950s, but that's an amazing scientific process that's fascinating to read about.
yeah,
Uh, and Crick, you know, Lewis Crick, and so on. Anyway, those
mm, yeah,
and the famous story about a woman who had really found out where the way it was going to work, and a lot of people thought that that woman should have gotten a Nobel Prize too, but she unfortunately died before she would have been eligible to get it.
yeah. It's and it's amazing too. Again, like I said before, the concepts that people have come up with, and some of it has been imaginary. I don't get me wrong, but at the same time, um, how do we know that they haven't tapped into something, that's more etheric, more metaphysical, shall we say, in terms of maybe that the power that created all of this and all of us, that we are actually able to tap into, which is another element we talk about on this program in terms of, listening to that still small voice. And of course, I will also acknowledge from my perspective, my observations, that each one of us has our own still small voice where we will get, as I've used the phrase 2020 vision, we will get perfect guidance and inspiration for ourselves. And I cannot get information for you, Chuck, from my still small voice, and you cannot get information for me from your still small voice. It is extremely individual. It is it's that's why I've always found it fascinating. First of all, when the religious folks, and we started out talking about this as well, they will say, God, God told me to tell you, and I stop them right there and I say, hold it. I'm right here. If God wants to call me collect, I will accept the charges, but I don't. Now, if I want some confirmation, I might go to an intuitive and say, "Look, I've been trying to nail this concept down in my own mind. Blah 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 blah. Can you give me some insight?" And then they will, with my permission, they will tap into, shall we say, the divine or the ethers or the metaphysical world, and they will give me maybe confirmation. But at the same time, this is also what's fascinating, Chuck. We talked about, looking into the past. All you have to do is look in the sky and you're looking into the past.
Right.
Um, when we are given that inspiration at that given moment, all right, that inspiration, that's fine. However, because everything is in motion in the next instant, that information may change
Right.
because everything is in motion, and I know people, we didn't talk about this. Maybe we'll save this for another program, another time. As they say, change is the only constant in the universe. And it's true. And that we have been taught to abhor it, to run from it. John Denver says in one of his songs, changes somehow frighten me. Still, I have to smile. It turns me on to think of growing old. And I remember hearing that when I was in my in my teens and 20s, and I would hear that song, and I'm thinking, yeah, I guess it would be kind of cool, growing old. Well, here I am, and it is. It actually is, and it's a lot of fun because of the community that I have developed through this program and elsewhere. But change is a tough one for a lot of folks. I know that even Amrita, my wife, she doesn't like it when people pass. She was more upset over my grieving over my father's passing than over my father's passing, which I know she was certainly upset about because she knew him. And same thing with my best friend of 53 years. We grew up grade school, high school, college, and so forth. But again, change is the one and only constant in the universe. And change meaning that everything is in constant motion. You ever have one of those instances, Chuck? I did at the age of 7. I'm sitting in Mass and I'm trying to blink really fast so that I can have two identical blinks of the eyes, right? Two identical.
Huh.
And as I'm trying to do it, my mind is racing to the point where I finally realized, oh, that will never happen. And I realized that everything is in motion. And so from the time of the first blink to the second, even though it's maybe a half a second, the universe and my molecular structure, the subatomic particles, everything is moving. So there can never be. You remember the story of the scientists conducting a particular experiment, and they did it once, and they got their result, and they said, "Well, let's do it one more time to make sure that we can confirm it." They got a different result, so they tried it a third time, got a third different result, and on and on. And then they finally theorized that they were affecting the results of the experiment.
That's something you have to check when you're doing experiments for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Fascinating stuff. And I know I've spoken an awful lot here. Folks, Chuck Champlin is my guest. The book is entitled Think Like a Molecule, as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and Chuck Champlin, I want to thank you so much. First of all, thank you for being a part of Tell Me Your Story and sharing this book and the story of it. And also our thanks to Leslie for allowing you to have so much time to share with us here on the program. And also, I want to let our listeners know we're going to have you back for, we'll call it part 2, not of Think Like a Molecule, part 2 having to do with your other book that we want to talk about called Wand. And give us a real quick synopsis of what that's about so people can prepare for that, because we're going to do that very soon so that folks can learn more about the work you're doing.
All right. Well, that book was written as a result of a contest by Ted Turner, the founder of CNN, for a book that would talk about the survival and prosperity of humanity. 2,500 people responded to his contest. I didn't win it like 2,499 people. But I'm proud to have the book. And the power of a wand is the power of a pencil or a pen to change the world. So that's the essence. But it's a man in 1989 Los Angeles who was trying to figure out a way to change the world. And so he's thinking that his wand may be one way to do it. So he gets involved with the homeless population and so on. So I will be very excited to talk to you about it.
Absolutely. And I will tell you that as a kid growing up, we would be asked, what do you want to do when you grow up? Or what do you want to accomplish in your life? And of course they said, yes, you could say you want to change the world, but don't do that because that's too big. It's just too big. You need to take it in bite sizes. Here I am, 63 years old, and I've been saying this for quite a number of years. I want to change the world. Okay. And it may be big, but it's gotten smaller, especially because of our capabilities with communication, transmission, and so forth. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. So we'll be very excited to hear more about you and the work that you are doing I find this fascinating when people do retire. 9 times out of 10, they are now busier than when they were working. And that's true with you too, I take it.
That's good. Well, I'm glad to be a role model. You get your book done, Guy. I want to have a copy of it signed by you. Choices. I want to see that book.
All
You
right.
go.
Well, we will talk off air about that because I want to get through it. It's not a big book. I mean, it's probably smaller than even the 2 books that I've got from you here. But one of these days, soon, very soon, and I keep saying this, and I make commitments to different guests, and I tell them about this. Okay, you make the commitment, you make the intention, and it's like, and that date went by. But I keep reminding myself, I'm not critical. I just keep reminding myself, divine right order, divine right order.
There you
It'll,
go.
it'll be out when it's time. Chuck, I have three final questions I want to ask you that I ask all of my guests. Once again, thank you so much for giving us an unbelievable amount of time here on the program. This has been great. But before I ask you those questions, I want to thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here on Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m., and then Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 following the news. And every single one of those 9 programs each week is different. And I'm so excited to be able to bring you so many of these programs that are available on our podcast site, which is SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher Player FM, Blueberry, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and many others. No, there's no glitch in the audio or video. I did repeat a couple of things there. We're also on YouTube, where you can watch these conversations. And we ask that you subscribe if you can. If not, I understand, as long as you're listening and or watching. And also click notification so that every time I put up a new conversation, you will be notified of that fact, and you can go and listen and watch. We ask that if you can support the work we're doing financially, we would be ever so grateful. We are appreciative to those who have helped and to those who will help. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Put in on the PayPal account when you go to send my email address, which is richard@richarddugan.com. That's richard@richarddugan.com. And also spend some time going within and listening to that still small voice during this, the decade of perfect vision. With all of that said, we now go to our final 3 questions. I will tell you, Chuck, that this used to be what I called the lightning round of Tell Me Your Story. But it sounded too much like a game show, and so I decided to drop that, but it was still kind of fun. First of the 3 questions is, who is Chuck Champlin?
An author and a scientist fan, husband to Leslie Champlin, and father or son of my father, Charles D. Champlin, who was a writer and wrote a couple of books called Back There Where the Past Was, and was a film critic for the Los Angeles Times. So I'm Charles Davenport Champlin, Jr. the 4th.
Oh, wonderful. And I did not know that, folks. Learn something new every day. Second question. What gets you up and out of bed every morning?
My alarm clock. And my wife saying, coffee's on.
All right. And our final question. This question comes from the movie City Slickers, where Mitch and his 2 buddies are on horseback. And Mitch asks the question of his 2 friends. I ask of you, what was your best day?
Well, so far, this one, guys, has been very, very fun. But I think my best day was when I married my wonderful wife, Leslie. So that was, and we did it on December 31st, 14 years ago. So we have just celebrated our 14th anniversary.
And I do believe we were there to witness it.
We're there. You and Amrita were there, part of the witnessing. So that was a wonderful moment at the Santa Barbara Mission. Are you still in the hills above Santa Barbara?
We are indeed. And I remember that day, and it was a beautiful December 31st, too, by the way, folks.
And you were very successful because we're still married and happily so.
As am I. Well, Chuck, once again, thank you so much. This has been fantastic, and we will have you back to talk about the other book called Wand here on Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, where we are giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to Lao, Jeanette, I am still listening. Dad, continue to be happy because I am. To my dear friend Smokey, I will see you on the other side. And to my dear friend Zorro, aho, aho.